Eric Bristow was the first darting superstar. He made it into a television product. When I was growing up, he was a household name.
He was the reason why I picked up darts and know that millions of other people.
You don't have waffle on.
Can you just referee this a little bit?
She made the quarter-final of a Grand Slam.
I've gone for Luke Littler. He's completely changed the demographic of our sport.
Had Barney just not existed, would MVG have come in and done what he's done?
Well, yes, I would say so.
So we spend a lot of time when we're at the darts having little debates. And we thought, well, why don't we just sit down and do it properly, have a heated debate, and then people can basically abuse you for your choices.
Which will happen.
Yes.
Yeah, it'll definitely happen. So we thought, well, why don't we do that? And we thought, never mind doing the top 10 darts players of all time. That's a great debate in itself. We'll probably do that another time. But we're a bit more interested in the top 10 most influential.
Jackie, we've excluded them from the top 10, haven't we? They would have obviously been there, but just for the,
Tell us that before we started, did you?
Oh, yeah.
That's why we're here.
It's purely for the benefit of the debate we've excluded.
We just had to,
I
otherwise
thought it's a
it could
top
go on.
100. I did. That's top 100.
Okay, so let's start with your number one and what you had to wrestle with to get to that, and then we'll come on to the rest.
Yeah, I was definitely toying with the top two for different reasons. It's all about longevity in the game for me. But it's the impact of the sport, and I've gone for Luke Littler simply because it's completely changed the demographic of our sport in the last 12, 13, 14 months. It has gone absolutely mental, and the media, the fans, the new fans, the viewing figures, everything you name. He's on TV all the time, he's mentioned on all news programmes, and I just can't, it's a no-brainer for me, it has to be Luke Littler.
Yeah, that famous breakthrough, the crossover,
incredible.
Transcending a sport, all that kind of language.
I mean, I'm lucky in the position I'm in the PDPA. I see a lot of these figures and things that people don't see, and it's changed the sport completely. It really has.
I get what Alan's saying, but for me, it has to be Eric Bristow. He was the first real superstar of our sport, and I can remember being with Alan, Phil Taylor, and Eric walking through an airport in Boston, and by that time, Phil had probably won 5 or 6 world titles. Didn't get stopped once, but Eric, every 10 feet, stopped for a photo and an autograph. And he was a megastar. He was on every chat show. And this is when we were doing, it wouldn't be unusual to do 10, 12 million viewers on Bullseye. And he was part of that generation. But I had to wrestle with the fact now of the modern world, the social media, the impact of that. We
could actually do a show just on Eric, on the stories that we and Chris have done.
No, you couldn't.
We used to go to
taken off air.
It'd have to be after midnight, wouldn't it? Darts After Dark or something.
No, we can just do it on YouTube.
Would
We
be
just do
good.
it on here.
But I am a little biased because obviously he was one of my best friends, or if not my best friend at the time. I shared a room with him, and he was the reason why I picked up darts, and no doubt millions of other people. And he just shades it. Just because I don't know, Luke it's too early for me. Yeah. It's like when we do the top 10 of all time. On ability, absolutely, he's right up there. But then you've got to think about the longevity and his initial impact.
You could argue, though, that Luke Littler's done more in 1 year than Eric's done in 30, even though Eric was brilliant, and I agree with everything you said. But Luke's done all that in 13, 14 months, what everybody's taken 30, 40 years to do.
And he's a kid.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he's 18 now, but you're still.
But that's
a kid.
partly down to the modern media, of course. As well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, see, I'm with Mace here, partly because he's huge and he's sitting right next to me. And Alan and I have been already, it's been a week or so. We took it offline, we took it online. We've been having this debate about Eric and Luke specifically. My take is, I'm with you, I think it's Eric, for reasons that you've mentioned. When I was writing the book, it became very clear, talking to Dick Alex, his first agent, the first agent in darts, that Eric Bristow was the first darting superstar. He made it into a television product. When I was growing up, he was a household name. You couldn't get him off our TV screens. He was the iron glove and the iron fist and the velvet glove that punched through into our living rooms, and he made darts.
Yeah,
he made it happen as a TV sort of spectacle.
He was the player that you either loved or hated, and most of them hated him.
Yeah,
because of the.
But he was compulsive watching.
But Muhammad Ali was the same, wasn't
Are
he?
you talking about viewers, or are you
But
talking
not
about
hated
other
him.
players?
They wanted him to lose. Want to see him lose.
Other players, you mean?
Players and fans.
But going back to my point about why him over Luke is everything you say is self-evidently true. He's propelled. The headlines are being written in a way that we haven't experienced in our time working at ITV, covering despite the Phil Taylor years and the Michael Van Gerwen years. He's taken it to the next level. But he's only done that because he's standing on the shoulder of giants. Taylor before him, but Taylor isn't Taylor without Bristow before Taylor. So there's a clear evolution, and the mark, the stamp that Bristow made in that first instance has a bigger impact for me than Littler.
You don't have waffle on.
If you think about the people of that generation,
Can you just referee this a little bit?
if you think,
Sorry, I was following the
Like,
then.
when
What
it's
did you say?
when
Can you
it's
start
so
again?
obviously the case that when an argument is crumbling, you just resort to sort of personal abuse.
I was
like that.
enjoying
Right.
that point
Thank you.
about
The gloves are off. Come on, the gloves are
what are these?
if you think
What
of
are they?
It's my mittens to go in my pajamas.
if you think of
Willie.
Pele, Muhammad Ali,
Yeah.
I don't know, Steve Davis, you automatically think of the greatest sportsman of all time. You'll put Eric Bristow in there, and most people do.
And we think about the standalone. We're talking about you're number one. But actually, your point about without Bristow,
There's no
we
Taylor.
wouldn't have had the Taylor that we saw, the 16 world titles and what have you. We don't necessarily think about the chronology and the knock-on effect of one to another.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is,
Well, you
make a
do
really
if you
good
give it
point.
some thought. If you don't give it much thought, if you just
Well,
go for
No,
the
but if you
nearest
just pluck
available
numbers.
headline, you just go Luke Littler.
If you just pluck names, you're
Is
thinking
that
in
where it pulls
isolation.
apart?
Well, if you think of the 14 guys in 1993 that risked everything,
Yeah, wow. Yeah, we
you
can
know,
talk about that. Yeah.
Alan, who was number one in the world at the time, and Jockey, Bob Anderson, Peter Evans, Jamie Harvey, Richie Gardner, Cliff Lazarenko, Kevin Spoilick, Keith Deller,
That's just off the
Lowy,
top of your head without
right?
reading it off a list as
Like
well.
if it wasn't for
It's in
their
big letters as well, look.
and again, I hate using this word bravery, but they remortgaged their houses, they couldn't do exhibitions, they risked
When you look
everything.
back on it, it's weird because, like I say, at the time I was world number one, expecting all these exhibitions, and you couldn't do any
Yep.
because you were banned from everything.
Yes.
Just explain what it was like at that time and just briefly, concisely, the thought process behind it, how it worked, and what it entailed for you guys.
But it all started off with the money. We were all I was with Tommy Cox, who was also had Jockey Wilson, Phil Taylor, Mike Gregory, and all the other guys got together because darts was dying. There was nothing on TV, so we decided to try and run our own tournaments. They were all regional ITV, like Anglia TV, Time Tees, and they were very successful. And they were just starting to build something, but then the BDO didn't want us to step into their market, I suppose, and so they banned us all. It was quite a difficult time because it went through courts. They were going to sue us all. We all had to change our mortgages. It was a really weird time because you couldn't get exhibitions anywhere because if you did one in London, the BDO would ring the venue up saying, why have you got a banned player? So then they'd cancel it. It was a really, really strange
If you were
time.
a Super League player and you played one of us in an exhibition match, they would ban that player from playing Super League and County and potentially playing for England.
Vitriolic.
Then Barry turns up and then look where we are
Barry
now.
Hearn.
So that was the dart's lowest ebb. You know, early 90s, that's a having built steadily through the 80s, it dropped off the edge of a cliff. That was the low point from which it had to rebuild, which brings me to the kind of fascination of this debate. We've been talking about Littler and Bristow. Barely mentioned Phil with his astonishing record that eclipses both of theirs, you know, in
I just want to
Spain.
mention that I picked the Man United fan out of the three.
Yeah, you have. There's that as
Obviously.
well. But my point about Taylor is it's interesting, isn't it, that none of us three have put him right at the top. Despite the fact you made the points at the beginning of this, we're talking about not the greatest darts player of all time, where we would have perhaps a different debate about Taylor. We're talking about the most influential. And yet, and even on that metric, you could argue that Taylor himself is the most influential. Because again, to come to this point about Littler's success, where would he have been
It
without
changed people's
Phil
perceptions of how good the game was because he took it to a level
Correct.
and everybody else was a long way off, and it took him a while to get to his level or close to his level because he was that good.
Yeah.
But people were watching a pub game that they've all played at some point in their lives,
Yeah.
thought it was easy, and then you see this guy doing it like he's putting him in with his hand. It was incredible.
It was almost mastering the impossible. And
Yeah.
he's the of that period, he was the closest thing I've ever seen to it, and that's why some of his numbers, even though the game has become slightly easier, even in the last 10 years, some of his numbers still stand. Which is
You made the point to me yesterday when we were talking through this in the green room about, and it's an honest point, but it's not often. I don't think people say it out loud all that often, but it is interesting. Some of the fascination of the, if you like, the Sky Taylor years. Although we had plenty of ITV Taylor years
Yes.
as well, where he won every single tournament. Some of the fascination was, is he going to lose?
Yeah.
is this the time he loses?
Yes.
Is this the one he
People
loses?
tuned in to just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
Is he going to get beat? It was very much like when you joined ITV, and Michael, you didn't see him lose for nearly 4 years.
The Phil Taylor point is really interesting because there's a certain generation and a certain type of darts fan who will be screaming at their gadget right now going, how can you have left it so long to talk about how great Phil Taylor was? His influence was immense. People were campaigning for him to be BBC Sports Personality of the Year and all the rest of it. 16 world titles. No one's ever got close, probably won't get close, whatever. How can he not be the most influential player? Why is that? And is that because he was so good for so long that it kind of almost didn't make it more interesting? It made it possibly less interesting?
He wasn't challenged that often, was he? There was a few players. I mean, I tried myself, obviously, Rod Harrington, Dennis Priestley, Peter Everson, and we tried to challenge him, and he was just too good, really. I mean, we won the odd ones, but over all them years, that's why he won so many world titles, not just the world titles, but all the other ones. But he wasn't really a character in the game. He was just so good. He wasn't a maverick, was he? When we're talking about the older players like Jockey, Bobby, Eric, they were mavericks in the game, where Phil was just so good. And it was on, well, the PDC, they used to call it Phil's Darts Club.
Yeah.
When it first started off, because he was winning everything.
And there is a point that needs to be made, and this is just a grown-up analysis. This isn't a swipe at anyone in particular, but it's just a fact that Phil's dominance came to the fore as a model of subscription television. So that was the era when the BBC had dropped, ITV and BBC had dropped darts. It was a yesterday's sport played by people who'd had too much to drink in a smoky pub, and it didn't fit with their agenda. So Sky built it from scratch with that new model, but it was, to a large extent, it built obviously momentum over the 90s and into the 2000s, but it was slightly hidden from the wider population. I think that might,
And everything was built around Phil.
Everything was built around Phil.
Guys,
so I think that
coverage.
plays into it as well.
And you've got to remember, during that period, what did they have, like 70, 80,000 people
He used
subscribed?
to be frightened to death if Phil got beat.
Yeah.
In an
Yeah.
early round of it.
And we felt that as players, man. Like, we felt that. Everything. I remember qualifying for the tournament in '95 that you won, the Quadro one.
Oh, UK match play. Yeah.
Me and Alan were staying in the same hotel, so we walked to the venue together, and as we walked in, there's posters everywhere. And the defending champion and world #1's face is not on one of them.
Huh.
Yeah.
All it was about was Phil. Phil this, Phil that. We were just sort
I
of...
went absolutely mad, as you imagine, but then what are you going on about? Well, hold on a minute, I've got a point here.
And then
nobody listened.
Remember that interview? I think you were world #1 again at the time. You sat down, and all he asked you about was Phil.
Yeah.
And he just took his mic off and walked out.
Wasn't there a match? Was it? I want to say it's a UK Open at Bolton when the Sky still showed it, and I'm sure that somebody had to delay their start of their match.
It was me, actually.
So it was you.
I was playing Les Fitton. It was in the World Championships, actually.
Yeah.
And it was a deciding set. It was getting really tense. It was getting close to the end. And it was Freddie Williams, actually, the referee, God rest his soul. He went like that. I went, what are you doing? He said, oh, Phil's bullying up. I went, what?
Is this true?
And it's the last leg of our massive tie-breaking game.
And they just paused
they
it
stopped
live on stage.
They're going to film Phil bullying up. I'm like, you're having a laugh, aren't you? So then I won the game, fortunately. Went into the interview with Dave Bobbin, and that's when I pulled my microphone off and threatened to go and get Phil there and then, sort of thing, as they say. But that was nothing against Phil.
No.
It was just the way everything happened. It was just
what you're doing is
what we had to put up
explaining
with.
how interdependent Sky Sports, that revolution, the PDC revolution, you can't call it anything else, were with Phil and vice versa. So it was a kind of like symbiosis there that was, but it wasn't national news.
No.
It was happening sort of like on the sly, just on the quiet and building slowly.
And
it made national news if somebody did something wrong.
Yeah.
Like
That's the only time.
Steve Davis is a great comparison. I mean, they used to call him Steve Interesting Davis. Yeah. Like, you think of Phil Taylor, he was all business.
Yeah.
There was no special effects with Phil. It was just boom, darts. You know what I mean?
He used to say to me he had to hit 5180s before he could have his Christmas dinner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Literally, and that was true. I asked his wife at the time, and she said that was true.
Wow. I mean, he was remarkable. He was a machine, but he didn't have that. If he had the personality of Eric, we'd be having a different conversation, and he would have made more of an impact.
Yes.
Because he would have been.
But you see, here's where I feel like I'm almost on the point of contradicting myself, because what happens next after Phil?
How many times you've changed that?
After Phil comes MVG, and then comes Littler, if you want to really sort of super simplify it, and then this proliferation of talent.
In between that, you've got Barneveld, who didn't necessarily make a huge impact in this country, But across Europe, immense. Like we were going to Germany and the Netherlands and Belgium playing in opens, and they were fairly low key. Along comes Barney, and the next thing you know, I was a week a month in Holland doing exhibitions.
Yeah.
For every month of the year for probably 3
Similar
years.
thing, different level, obviously. Similar thing happened with Barney when he first won the world title in Holland, as it happened with Luke Littler in this country, but not at a different level. It almost came to a superstar overnight by winning the world title. And then obviously everybody in Holland followed that. And we used to go and do exhibitions in Holland, and the rooms were always full. It just went absolutely mad, just like Germany is now.
Yeah.
And all these people we're talking about because of their specific influence, but for different reasons. So you talked about Eric Bristow at the start. That was my generation as a kid. He was always on TV, Bullseye. He broke through there.
Chat shows.
And then you talk about Phil on Sky. Very different to the serial, brutal winner on Sky Sports compared to Eric, the personality on Chat Show. Very, very different. Both excellent dart players. And then you're talking about Barney, and you're talking about a whole different territory, something the PDC clearly love, want, need. How they could murder a replica of the Barney influence in the Netherlands and kind of bleeding over to Germany, wanting Germany to have that character, wanting North America ideally to have that character. Australia, obviously we've got Damon Heta here as the only non-European, but for darts to grow, you kind of need that Barney followed by MVG type in different territories.
Well, that's the whole idea of the World Series and the European Tour. It's going to territories where there's an interest in the sport. They know because the broadcasters want it, and of course the opportunity for host nations to qualify, and that's the plan. I mean, you think in recent years
A lot of these countries they go to, they're not going to see a big TV event, so it's the only time they can experience what we call the darts phenomenon, where it's a party atmosphere but world-class sport.
Another little point about Barney that springs to mind is I think the evolution of his career, the way it panned out, rubber-stamped the imbalance of power between the BDO and the PDC and led eventually to the demise of the BDO, because he becomes the Lakeside World Champion and he switches codes.
Barney's problem was he had such a long gap in between success. He had so much success in the BDO, came over, won that epic final against Phil, which again, when you talk about influential, rules got changed.
He's not going to beat Phil, was the story at the
And
time.
I mean, when you look at the first half of the match, you're thinking, well, he ain't going to beat him. He's going to get wiped out. He played him in that racer,
that 1 hour
1 hour
thing.
racer,
That was ITV, that wasn't
and slaughtered him. That was on, it was on ITV, and then there was gaps. I mean, there was success, but there was big gaps, and that for me, I mean, he's in my top 10, Barney, of influential players, but I probably would have had him higher if he would have done more. But maybe his best days were within that BDO system where.
So you mean if he'd won more in the PDC, specifically won more titles, then he'd be more influential?
Yes.
Because they don't always go hand in hand, titles and influence.
But in terms of the further impact he would have made, and this is what this is about. It's about the impact of a player. But I mean, he's got a huge fan base in all around the world, but in the UK, but in Holland, he was literally like Eric. He was on every TV programme over there.
Who's the most influential?
He used to do 2 a night, didn't he? He used to go to one and do 3 hours and then go to another one in the same time.
That's the only way he could do them.
Who's the most influential Dutch darts player of all time? There's a top 2, isn't there? There's a pretty clear top 2.
Bert Blandenburg. Big Bert.
Jean Van Veen?
Who's
okay. I think you'd have to go. I think you'd have to go for MVG. I really do, because we're looking at it from the PDC's perspective, not historical, more recent than Barney's thing with the BDO. But I agree with Chris there that it doesn't matter what your argument is. He was playing in a system which was a good system, but it wasn't the best system. Whatever argument anybody says, the better players were in the other system, even though there was good players in the BDO. So
who went on to do well in the PDC.
That's right. And Michael van Geuren was obviously in the BDO, came to the PDC, and started winning all these titles. Once he eventually had them early wins over Phil Taylor. Oh, I can beat him, and then all of a sudden he goes on this role for 10 years.
Slightly different question, though, isn't it? We're not asking who's the better player necessarily. We're asking who had the bigger influence.
Well, like you said, without Eric, there'd be no Phil. Without Barney, there'd be no MVG.
But is that right?
You can't always go on the early ones.
No.
Because they were earliest.
No, I'm going to go in that particular head-to-head between those two. I'm actually going to go with Michael, I think, because this is partly me contradicting myself, because the way he played the game was unlike anything I'd ever seen before when he came along. He was like Mike Tyson.
So fast, wasn't it?
It was ridiculous. He'd walk into the ring and just like tear your head off and then walk out again, you know.
Well,
Specifically
we've
on
got
that
time,
point,
then.
specifically on that point, had Barney just not existed, would MVG have come in and done what he's done?
Well, yes, I would say so, yeah. Because
Without that influence to
obviously a very
love the
young
sport.
player in the game when he won the World Masters. 15, 16, was he?
Yeah.
Somewhere around there?
There's a good overlap.
Oh, no, sorry, I'm
between
thinking of
the
that
two.
9 darter.
Yeah.
That was when he was 16, wasn't it?
16, yeah.
And then everyone was like, who is it? You know, how we see or how we perceive young players coming to the game now. This happened and there was nothing happening then. And all of a sudden this young kid comes through and here's a 9 darter on TV. We're like, who is this?
I mean, he won the World Masters at 17, but the game was in such a mess then already that there was no, and of course it was pre-real social media as we know it today. So there was no way of him being put out there like Luke is now.
Yeah,
But
but I remember that. I remember when he first turned up, still as a teenager, but at Wolverhampton back in the Civic days, at the early days of the Grand Slam. Just the awe. Everyone was like, there were whispers in the bar, and it was like, hey, that's Van Gogh. And just wait till you see him, and you know, from very early on.
But for 2 or 3 years, he didn't do anything. Couldn't win a game. Even I beat him.
I was going to say, me and Chris both beat him. I've never lost to him.
But it is interesting the influence of Barney on him, which he's talked about
Yes.
repeatedly, and how that perhaps guided him, signposted
you get that
him,
with an older
gave
and
him
younger player.
belief.
You're always going to get that with an older and younger player from the same country. It's always going to happen.
I mean, I've got MVG above Barney.
So have I. Just by
so
one
have I.
place.
MVG
One
above
place.
Barney.
Yeah.
By one place.
One person we haven't mentioned, Fallon Sherrock.
That's huge. I think, yeah.
We'll come on to Fallon in a minute, but just on that kind of looking at who you've mentioned in your kind of middle of the pack range. In fact,
Mid-table.
In fact,
Should we do
Alan,
1 to
you
5?
have- in fact, you have got Fallon fourth. I was going to talk about John Lowe, first live televised 9 darter, which we will do. But okay, you've got Fallon as number 4. Now, some people might be shocked at that, bearing in mind the players
It's just this
of
impact.
quality we've talked about. So explain why.
At that time, when it happened, it was unknown for a woman to play in the World Championship, not just compete with the men, but beat them.
Yeah.
And this is why it had such a big impact, not just in this country, but around the world. As you're a massive person on women's sport, obviously. You followed it yourself, didn't you? And it was just an amazing story. They still talk about it now. Still the clip of her beating Mensa Sulovic is one of the Sky's main images. And we're talking about Luke Littler and the impact he's had on the sport in such a short space of time. This was on the similar level, but not to the degree of Luke Littler. And it kind of needed it at the sport at the time because it was just rolling on. There were some good players, tournaments were going well. But all of a sudden, this bang, something happens, and then everybody wants to watch the sport again. And that's for me why I've got them 2 in the top half a dozen.
It's hard to argue with that, actually. The case for Sherrock is quite compelling. I mean, she's all our top 10s, I think, quite comfortably.
Yeah, I've got her at 6.
Yeah.
So what was your take on what she brought and what she changed?
What Alan was talking about earlier, we get to see all the algorithms and the most searched names and how many times it comes up on Google or how many times she's written about in newspapers, because newspapers are online. But when you've got, I think it was Ellen DeGeneres, wasn't it? She wanted her on her show. And then you've got people like some of the biggest sporting women.
Billie Jean King. There's no
King.
bigger.
There's no bigger. And they're talking and tweeting about it or Xing, whatever it's
Sarah
called.
Jessica Parker.
So, yeah. I mean,
Crossover.
The impact, she did more. And I don't know what...
Jackie might be able to explain it better, because can you explain it better for us? Because obviously you're a big influence on women's sport.
Yeah.
What influence did it really have?
So I'd have been watching anyway, whether Fallon was playing or not. So me personally, it's irrelevant. But the thing that really brought it home to me was most of my girly friends are not really into sport at all. They vaguely care about the results of my football team to see what kind of mood I'll be in, or England at World Cups, and possibly Euros. That's it. Never, ever, 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 ever did they ask me about darts. Never. Oh, you're off to the darts. Where is it? Okay, great. Literally never talked about, no offence, Phil Taylor, Michael Van Gerwen, anyone who was doing well at the time. Not at all. Until Fallon Sherrock came along. And then my phone was going mad with my friends, acquaintances, because they knew I worked in darts but hadn't thought to ask me about it. And they're like, oh my God, Fallon Sherrock. So she was on Good Morning Britain. And on Good Morning Britain, they weren't just talking about Fallon Sherrock. They were talking about news from Australia, where the news of Fallon beating not one, but two men live on the PDC World Championship stage had got through. So it wasn't Fallon beating a man. You know, we had Lisa Ashton, who was doing fantastically well and better known within the game by then, and other players who've gone before, Trina Gulliver before that, who deserve a huge amount of credit for what they've done for women's darts. We're talking about influence, widespread, beyond the realms of darts fans, beyond the realms of sports fans. So when my friends were messaging me about Fallon and asking about Fallon, this was completely different. And that is what we talk about as being cut through and in the media. And also our colleagues who are here, who go to various tournaments, some of the hardcore that go to all the tournaments. And there are some journalists who are attracted to, I'm going to be able to get some copy in the paper. And on darts, as you know, Phil Lanning's been plugging away for many, many years, Rob Moore. These guys are getting more work and more copy in the paper because of players such as Fallon. So if we're talking purely about influence...
Look at the media rooms now, they're full, aren't they? Well, there used to be two or three hanging about, and now they're full.
Yeah, and it's just really sad at the time that COVID came around straight after. Her initial success, December 2019. Q School, she's not had the success with, and Lisa has. But in terms of that cut through, that's what Fallon had. And we were on, don't laugh, but Celebrity Chase together because Fallon had done what she'd done on the PDC World Championship stage live on TV, and it literally went around.
So why was you on?
And it also, exactly, because I should have been there with a microphone probably. But that is the influence that she had. And then of course the knock-on influence is, oh, can little girls play darts? Like, can they actually play darts? Whereas if you've only seen big scary blokes like you two on stage looking like you belong with a dart in your hand, then it changed mindsets, it changes perceptions, it changes...
Well, even yourself, you got yourself a dartboard and started playing with the family, didn't you?
Yeah, not because of Fallon, though. But it is a great, great sport. I mean, we know that, preaching to the converted, but she did have a huge impact.
And it's what she did after that. I mean, those couple of years of COVID were awful for her because it really held her back, and the opportunities that were available to her, she couldn't take. And I'm sure if you speak to her in probably 10 years' time, she'll go, yeah, that hurt. But she then went on to make a final of a World Series event where she pushed MVG to the limit. She made the quarter final.
He was sweating. He was sweating.
She was jumping about like a rabbit. She was all over the place.
She made the quarter final of a Grand Slam where her and Peter Wright were absolutely just exchanging all the way throughout. It was wonderful. So it wasn't a one-off thing. It wasn't a one-hit wonder. She's now hit a 9-darter on TV, the first woman to do that. And this is years after. This was last year. A fabulous influence and a positive one as well. That's what it was for me. That's why the impact she made and the positivity, the impact on academies and things like the JDC and just a completely different demographic asking me about walking around the supermarket. Wasn't she amazing? Yeah. You know, now we're having it now with Luke Littler.
Exactly.
He was in my pub just over 13 months ago, literally the week before the World's going to start. Stood in the pub, not a person in there knew who he was. Post Worlds, where he made the final, like, is that the fella that was in the bar? Yes, mate. He was there with his mum and dad. We were doing a preview to the Worlds.
Drinking an orange squash.
No, he was drinking J2Os, not so.
Yeah.
There is other juice drinks available. Yeah, and like they couldn't believe it. They just literally couldn't believe that was the same person. And now, walking around a supermarket, rather than it take me 20 minutes, it takes me an hour because I'm really stop. Oh, tell me about Luke Littler. Oh, Luke Littler played great. Luke Littler this, Luke Littler that. Yeah. Unbelievable impact.
That's exactly
I've got
that.
to say one. Me and Ned were having an argument the other day about one particular player, or two particular players, and I've actually changed my mind. And the player is Bobby George, and I've actually put him in. And the reason I put him in is because I made the mistake of ringing him. They said, "Listen here, boy, if I'm not in that top 10, you're in trouble." So he's now in my top 10.
Yeah.
But if we're talking purely influence, Fallon Sherrick, we've explained why, and also, by the way, nerves of steel on that stage. The pressure that was on her in that moment, and she was cool as anything. And
the spotlight was.
She's very late.
I think as well, the comparison between Littler and Sherrick's interesting because these two breakthrough headline acts have come in quite quick succession, one after the other.
Two things you didn't expect in the
Two
game.
things you didn't expect, precisely. A female performing at that level and beating a man, and then a teenager coming along and doing, they're just anomalous almost,
Yeah.
and fascinating. They're very different people, obviously, but they are, when they're interviewed the way they come across, they are so relatable, both of them, aren't
Yes.
they? And it speaks to the heart of what dart means. There's not something slightly unschooled about them. They're just quite natural. They're not reluctant to be interviewed or be in the spotlight, but they're also not loving it.
No.
They're just kind of...
They don't want to be famous.
They don't really want to. They just want to be good at what they do. And
Fallon's
they
a
are,
hairdresser
they are
from
both
Milton
laid back,
Keynes,
actually.
yeah.
they're
Yeah.
both very
Very
laid back,
laid
and I think people, whether consciously or subconsciously, absorb that, and it does actually tell you about the nature of this particular sport and why it's different.
Yeah, which is
from everything else.
Which is why I've always come to the defence, especially of Fallon, because some of the hate. Oh, she's been gifted this. Oh, she's been gifted that.
it's
Not gifted anything. No. It's
The opposite.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
It's
the
been harder for her because of the standard of male darts right now. I mean, of course, Bo Greaves, she's now taken women's darts to just a completely different planet. Unbelievable. And her journey at this level is only just beginning.
She's so young as well, isn't she?
Yeah, 21, I think.
Who do you want to go next? We haven't really talked Jockey Wilson,
Jockey Wilson's
John
my
Lowe.
next one.
Where
Jockey
are you?
Wilson's my next one. He's number 7 on my list.
Agreed. I've got him at 8, I think.
I mean, this guy was on top of the pops.
Yeah.
By mistake.
But it was by mistake, by a bit of wording.
Yep.
But there we go.
Yep.
But a dart player with a slightly larger belly than most people on top of the pops was just unique. But
Jockey Wilson said,
what a player.
Jackie.
That's right, yeah. What a player he was. What a
character.
influence, character, maverick, all them things. And we mentioned Eric about him being that early maverick, but it was because of the
He had a dance partner.
Yeah.
he had a dance partner with Jockey Wilson because everybody wanted to see them two play each other and see if they were going to have a fight after or during, which happened a few
Or
times.
both.
What was Jockey like as a character?
He was actually quite quiet, actually, in company. He didn't kind of like somebody there that he didn't know. He, for instance,
Wasn't
if
very trusting.
No, if he was sat with me and Chris, we'd been having a chat, and then say Ned came along, nice chap, obviously, now and again, but he'd be like wary of him, and
Yeah, who's
he
that?
doesn't. Who's that? What's he here for? What's he going to do? And he kind of couldn't handle social situations
Why
as
was
good as
that,
other
do you
people. I don't know. I've no idea.
He's a bit unpredictable, wasn't he, as well? Rob,
Yeah,
Rob
I mean, he
telling
had
the
a
story of-
rough
Yeah.
upbringing. Rough upbringing, like children homes and...
He was funny. He was funny.
But it was two versions of Jockey. One without a beer and one full of beer, and they were literally like night and day. But if
Literally, probably.
He was the first Jekyll and Hyde, I think, wasn't he?
Yeah, if you caught him right, he was great company and really funny. But listen, this is about his impact and Alan's spot on. They were so lucky in that era. They had dance partners. It's like being the greatest.
It's a great
fighter,
expression.
but
That's a really good expression.
not having someone to do it against. And there was Eric was the man, but it wasn't like the gap that Phil had over all of us. He was the man, but he wasn't that much better. Like if you said Phil was sort
He
of
used to
10%
win because he was
better.
in the face.
Yeah,
And they hated it. The players hated
and
it.
Eric had a way. He could manipulate a situation. He could almost talk you out of it. It's like Mike Tyson. They say about Mike Tyson when they do that head-to-head before the fight, they would look at him and go, "Oh no." Well, and Eric had that. He was so clever. Just some of the
The
things.
first
he would
time I
say.
played Eric on TV, I went to the toilet just beforehand to psych himself up, and he comes in. He says, "What time's your taxi?" I'm like, "What?" And it gets in your head straight away. And I'm thinking about it all going on the stage. It was like, oh.
I think Jockey's biography was one that everyone followed a little bit, and it wasn't, it had a downbeat ending, didn't it? It was,
Yeah,
it was a sad tailing
I think
off.
so,
and
yeah.
and
I mean,
I think
he
people
wasn't
followed
looked
that
after
story.
properly. He was just a player, and I'm not being disrespectful to him, not the cleverest man on earth, but he could play darts.
Yeah.
And people loved to watch him play because he was unpredictable. You never know what he was going to do, if he was going to punch the bloke who was marking the board or anything. We just didn't know. But at the end, he was working 6-7 days a week and just not making any money. So
Yeah.
But he was one of those players that we talked about at the beginning in the Eric Bristow era of, I was a wee lassie growing up, Jockey Wilson was just really, really well known in a way that Eric Bristow was really, really well known before the Phil
And
Taylor
again,
era.
he made the front and the back pages of the newspapers, and
And not
Not
many
for
not
bad
many have done that.
No,
Not that
no,
many
and
darts players have done that.
No, exactly that. And he was hounded, and he was tucked up a few times, and the amount of times he bounced back, and you think of that gap, the big gap in between world titles. The 2-time world champion, won loads of other tournaments, but to win and that gap again. It was 7 years, wasn't it?
Yeah.
7 year gap.
Yeah.
And then to play Eric in the final, you know, when Eric was still very much not necessarily the man, but the way he dealt with it, he was 5-0 up, and Eric got it back to 5-4, and you could see Jockey was absolutely gone.
Twitching everywhere, wasn't
Yeah, he was. He dropped down, and he was almost like, you know, looking at. He got down on one knee to shake Eric's hand, and that was a real respectful moment, because everybody who was playing darts then knew that Eric was done. You know, Eric's career really as an elite player. I mean, he won it 5 times, but he made 5 finals as well. You know, 10 finals of the Worlds. His career at its absolute optimum level probably only lasted 6 or 7 years. So to cram in 5 World Masters, 5 embassies, 4.
I'm thinking of them bad stories. Some of the things we used to get up to in America, but we'll leave that for another day.
And we talk about territorial influence, Ned, in the way that we talked about Barney in the Netherlands. I mean, does that still apply to Jockey Wilson?
I was
in Scotland?
wondering that.
Yeah,
I was
well,
thinking
look
that.
at
Gary
He's the
Anderson.
first.
Gary Anderson's
He's the
the same
first
now,
Scottish
isn't he?
name we've got on the list.
Gary
Is that-
Anderson is the same, isn't he? In
Yeah.
Scotland. I mean, they love the sport in
think so.
Scotland like
Yeah.
any other country, and they go mad for darts.
I mean, you do an exhibition with Gary up in Scotland, and it don't matter where it is, it'll be sold out.
Yeah, I think
mean,
it's a
he
good
is
point. I think it
super,
adds to
super
the
That was the
story,
same with
adds to
Jockey.
the Jockey Wilson
Yeah.
story, doesn't it? And that was in the era, of course, of beer cans coming flying out of the crowd.
Yeah, but Eric's response was great. Yeah, a bit like Jockey, they missed as well.
They missed as well.
I mean, he was so quick. Like literally, he was. And it was a full kind of.
With our last
By the way.
4 in our top 10, I've just packed them all for players of this era, I'm afraid. I've kind of like,
Well,
My
I
last
had
4 I've
Jockey.
gone Jockey, John Lowe,
Yeah,
Bobby
John Lowe.
George, Bobby George, and Peter Wright.
Okay, John Lowe, first live televised 9-darter.
And that's
How
it.
significant was
That's
that
it.
in terms of, again,
Well, you look at
cut
other
through
sports. You look
influence?
at snooker with a 147. We mentioned it before, didn't we? The hole-in-one in golf. It's the best you can do in the sport, and it wasn't done. It's
Perfection.
never been done before.
And
Perfection.
at that time, you're talking about dartboards with a target area somewhere between 15 and 20% smaller.
Yeah, good point.
You know,
Yeah.
the skill then was it in a 180. You had to go either middle, left, and right, or start on the right, put one in the treble there, one in the middle, one there. There wasn't the route. They had them vertically now. You know, everything had moved on, and the reason why it was
How
on
many years ago was it? It was
1984
84.
MFI match play
Look
against
how
Ellen.
long.
41.
£100,000.
It was
Yeah.
£100,000.
Plus
That's-
£2,000 for the highest finish,
finished.
and he still hasn't spent
So
it.
it was on. It was on ITV, wasn't it?
Yes.
And I remember talking to Jim Rosenthal, who
But
presented
Keith
it,
Delvey played.
who
Yeah.
Jim was playing golf, and he met the marketing director there at the golf course, like you do, of MFI. And he persuaded them to put the money up
Yes.
for the tournament, sponsor the tournament in the first place, and then also put the prize fund up for the 9-darter.
So that's how much
And
of a
he's-
rarity
Exactly.
it was.
So Jim said, "Don't worry, it won't happen.
It won't happen.
It won't happen.
Because
No,
it never.
no way." So they should put 100 grand up. That'd be fine.
Jockey missed one on.
And they, by the way, that was the
Double
end of
18.
MFI's involvement in the sport.
Yeah, well, yeah.
They never came back.
Please clap.
Yeah, I mean, that moment alone. But and he also won 3 world titles in 3 different decades.
Yeah.
One against me, unfortunately.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
What he didn't have,
1993.
what he didn't have, unlike a lot of the other names we got, is charisma.
Yes,
Let's
he-
be honest, he didn't have charisma.
I think
he just had the facts.
You can't
of what
let
he did,
everybody having the
you
same
know.
character. He was on the other end, wasn't he? He was they call him Stone-faced, didn't
Yeah.
he? Quite quiet, unassuming,
Yeah.
but obviously a wonderful player.
So on to Gary Anderson then.
Well,
we talk about.
I'm going to do mine.
Okay.
So we know the 6. I won't worry about order: Bristow, Taylor, Littler, MVG, RVB,
Yeah.
Fallon. I've got Deller. Then I've got John Lowe. Then I've got Jockey. Now, in my P10, I actually, and it was a discussion I had with Richard Ashdown last night.
We talked about it last night, wasn't
Andy Fordham had a huge
Yeah.
impact
Yeah.
on the sport, and he's forgotten about really when you think that the TV programs he won and the struggles he had, but he was also involved in that huge match with Phil Taylor at the Circus Tavern again that was shown that time it was on Sky, wasn't it?
It was the annual BDO champion against PDC,
BC
wasn't it?
champion, and that was huge at the time, but because again you'd have to be of a certain age to have remembered how massive that was, because there was so much bitterness between BDO and PDC, not necessarily the players, but certainly certain groups of people involved in both organisations where that match was a bit, I suppose it was like Celtic versus Rangers, but the darts version.
Yeah, listen, Andy lived very near me in South East London, just up the road. And you know, when he was sober later on in life, I got to know him quite well. He used to pick me up and take me to Super League, just show me around, sort of thing. He's the loveliest man in the world.
He
Oh,
was.
absolutely. Great company.
But he's not in my top. Not in my top 10. Not at the expense of. See, I'm going low, as we discussed, for the night. The jockey, as we've discussed. Della sneaks it in just about for me because I remember him from my childhood.
In mind. I mean, Keith's a really good friend of mine.
1983, the impact he had then, he beat the top 3 players in the world. He wasn't expected to beat any of them. He was a qualifier. He was known within the dart circles, but pretty much unknown. And again, you know, he was on the front and the back pages. It was massive. He was 23 years of age. He looked like he was about 17, 18.
He really did.
Milky Bar kid.
Milky Bar, that's right, yeah. And it was huge.
Everyone likes Milky Bars.
And again, that had a little impact of where people were saying, right, I'm going to take up darts. I'm going to start playing darts. Or you might have had a 15, 16-year-old lad that was, you know, just starting to show signs.
So have we all got Keith?
I've got Keith.
I've got Keith.
You haven't?
I think he's just outside for me.
Right. Can I mention the one that mine non-Andy Ford, I'm not quite. Bobby George is in the darts. Bobby George has got to be in the. We all agree on that.
Yeah,
Yes,
Bobby's
absolutely.
You would agree now. You didn't all necessarily
No.
agree initially.
No, but then
where's that come from?
Well, I tell you where that comes from. Being in a
When you're ringing,
Yeah,
you're in trouble, aren't you?
being in the hotel last night, and people that you know that work in the sport, and then you start talking about Bobby, and then everybody goes, "Oh, you want about Bobby George?"
Yeah, absolutely.
You want
It's the
about
one
Bobby
name,
George?
isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the one name.
And
Fallon.
as
Bobby.
much for his, one, he invented the walk-on.
Yeah.
It wasn't actually his idea, it was his agent, wasn't it? He said, why don't you take this candelabra and do this thing? And he went, I don't know. And it worked. And he was the first player to do a walk-on. That's really significant.
Well,
That's really significant.
When you look at it nowadays,
It's really
everybody there
This
with
is
the
how-
banners and
This is how
Sorry,
smart.
mate, just to complete my Bobby George. So he invented the walk-on, and then forget about his illustrious playing career. It didn't hit the absolute heights, but it was good enough, underrated. What was more significant, we're talking about the influence of the game, is his presence on our television screens on BBC at Lakeside year after year after year to a much bigger audience than Sky were broadcasting to in the Phil Taylor years. Simultaneous with that, Bobby George was jangling his chains around
100%.
on Lakeside, keeping the presence of darts in the nation's life. And he was he was really good at it, really funny, really honest, turned him into a celebrity. Bobby George is in the top 10.
Yeah, and John Lowe once called him a Mickey Mouse player, so he went out and got this big, sparkly, spangly shirt. And
did he ban him? John Lowe wanted it banned, didn't he?
yeah, and he went on stage with it on, right? And everybody loved it.
Yeah.
And he was just unique. Like I said, very underrated player. Won many, many big tournaments.
Yeah.
Great company as well.
And
All right, so no discussion.
no, Bobby's in my top 10.
Again, the cut through, and again, the TV shows that are not dart shows, I keep coming back to because we're talking about
It's reach, isn't it?
Yeah.
the reach, the different people who'd never be watching darts but are presented with this chap talking about whatever subject
Because
it
they
might
know
be.
people
And
want
he'd
to
be
see
there
him.
with his
Whatever
rings
he's
and his
doing, people
jewellery.
want to see him, don't they?
Yeah.
And he's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He
And he's a character.
He is a character, and he's synonymous with our sport. If again, if you get 1,000 people and go, anybody know who Bobby George is? They go, what, the dart guy with all the gold
100%.
and the candelabra. They'll know, and
And
the
if-
walk on.
And if they're watching him on daytime TV talking about whatever, they're not thinking, oh, how many titles has he
No.
won? Or has he won
There
the
you go.
so-and-so Open?
There you go, yeah.
They're not thinking that. I don't really care. It's like, Bobby George, darts,
Back to
character.
that word again, impact.
Yeah.
Impact on the sport.
Okay, so you've all put Bobby in. So who's been shunted out of your top 10 for Bobby? Are you willing to divulge? Ned, Bobby George has to be on this list.
Well, we did. Let's be honest.
That's when me and Ned were having a bit of a spat, shall we say?
An online spat.
Online spat. It was getting quite touchy. My computer was getting warm. It was. We were discussing whether Bobby should be in, and then I reserved the right to change my mind, and then I made the mistake of ringing him, so that's why I put him back in.
I mean, there was some massive figures in the sport, but just not at the right time.
Yeah.
You know, again, it's a generational thing. It's a timing thing. But people like Rod Harrington and Dennis Priestley who achieved.
You had a strong case. I must admit, a strong case for Peter Wright's inclusion.
Yes.
Well, he's actually in.
He's in your top 10.
He's in the 10, but
yeah.
I was debating whether to put him, but I changed my mind. I put Gary just outside.
Gary, right?
Yeah. No, but again, it's we're not talking about if we're talking about top 10 players. both Gary and Peter Wright.
If we could all have top 15, we'd all be in, but then we'd be thinking who's going to be 16 or 17, or they've left them out. So it's
Okay,
the
so
same thing,
specifically on the two Scottish-born players, Gary Anderson, Peter Wright.
Peter's more influential.
What's the difference in terms of influence?
Commercially, you go to Germany or any of the.
I presented the darts masters in Yokohama in the World Series years ago, about 10 years ago. Everyone was in a Peter Wright.
Mohican.
Mohican.
Yeah,
everyone.
His influence is.
He's
It's
the most popular player in Europe. By a distance.
Yeah,
and this is where we talk about
merchandise. He sells more than anybody.
Lovely chap, very friendly,
Well,
but in terms of personality,
he's
very
quiet.
very quiet, and calm and all
And
the
that's
rest of
why
it.
he didn't make my top. He has he's had a massive positive influence on our sport. But again, you've got to have that personality, that real impact
And its impact's a word. So I think all these other players we've listed have had a moment in their career. Or there's a definable point where you can go, that's where they punched through. That's where their career matters.
Absolutely. Perfect.
And with Peter, he's been part of a movement that's already there.
Yes, same as Gary.
He's played an important part in it.
I always remember when Peter Wright first turned up in the World Championships, when he got to did he get the final or win it? I can't remember. And he first had the Mohican hair and the shirt, and everybody was like, what is going on here? Who's this?
But that was Joe's
we all
idea,
knew
wasn't
Peter, who was a really quiet fella.
Yeah, he reinvented himself.
Absolutely.
But isn't
it
this
worked.
really interesting?
Like you
because
coming back for the Butlins Minehead with a bubble pearl.
Go back to it.
I'll just write that down. I'll write that down.
But when you think of Peter Wright, and if younger viewers maybe aren't so aware of what he looked like before, it's worth looking on YouTube, looking up Peter Wright.
1995 debut in the Worlds against Richie Burnett.
Yeah.
You wouldn't even think it's the
Short
same.
brown hair. He looked more like you.
Yeah.
Now
You
looks more like you.
Wouldn't think it was the same person, but
No,
But
absolutely.
Joe, his wife, deserves a huge amount of credit
absolutely.
for the marketing, the
She could-
branding, the shirts, the everything, the Mohicans,
just
the
on
little
that point
kids
there,
wearing.
with the hair, it takes, 4, 5, 6 hours? I can't think of any other player that would sit there waiting for the head
About
and wait for a
2
game.
to 3 now, yeah.
yeah, because I think he's had
There's no way I
the
would
snake tattooed. now,
Tattooed,
and
yeah,
he's-
because he used to have to sleep on one side, didn't he? Get it done the night before and then sleep on one side.
I mean, that's a big commitment,
That
isn't
is
it?
a big commitment.
But he's reinvented himself, and again, the sport has benefited because he's so recognisable. You know, again, I don't know what his name is, the guy with the Mohican. Yeah. And you go, what, Peter Wright? Yeah, that's him.
Snakebite even.
Yeah, snakebite. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't know
David
what his name
Cloud
is.
last night when he was on.
I don't know
Yeah.
what his name is. You'll hear that slightly too often, won't you?
Yeah, exactly
You
that.
know, that's-
Which is why
he's not quite in your
no.
top 10. Yeah.
But what about how his form improved after he changed
Remarkable.
the marketing and all the rest of it? Because it's almost, I don't want to get too into the psychology of it, although I'm fascinated by it, but being such a quiet, shy, retiring
And then
character,
getting
looking like himself, not anywhere near the player he was, as he almost was taken over by this persona that wasn't him, that had been created for him, but he presumably grew to love, and everyone grew to love, and the walk on and the song, let's get the party started.
But I think that worked perfectly for him because of that psychology, because he could become Snakebite.
Yeah.
It wasn't worried about Peter Wright anymore. It
almost
was
like that
like
click, wasn't it?
two different
I
people,
remember.
because he is. You sit down and he's quiet and he don't really say anything about anything, and he's like trying to get blood out of us. Come on, Pete. Come on, tell me what you think.
It's brilliant when you see him away from the darts, not at a tournament, and he
Yeah.
doesn't have to do the hair, and it's just like that,
Yeah.
flop down like that, isn't it? Like,
Or in the airport.
at the air's just like that, isn't it?
But he's been an incredible asset and still continues to be.
And
for
also
us.
an influence, just finally on Peter Wright, about how you might not necessarily get your greatest success until later on.
Yeah.
You know,
Is he
towards
49?
mid-late 40s,
Yeah, 49,
really.
something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That he started to
Big
win
change.
and then World Championships and what have you followed.
I like
Okay.
I like the fact he threw all these trophies away that weren't winning ones.
Yeah.
And said, I'm only having winning ones, and then big practices, as we know, and then started
Worked hard.
filling up the cabinet again.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Interesting story for him. Okay. So, have any of you changed your mind in the course of this debate? Or is your personal top 10 the same as when we sat down here?
It stayed the same, but I did change it slightly just before this morning, after a few discussions yesterday and last night in the bar.
Okay, so give us your final decisive top 10.
Top 10. In order, Luke Littler, 1, Eric Bristow, 2, Phil Taylor, 3, MVG, 4, Barney, 5, Fallon, 6, Jockey Wilson, 7, John Lowe, 8, Peter Wright, 9, Bobby George, 10.
Okay, so Gary Anderson just misses out.
Just misses out.
Okay.
Bristow, Taylor, Littler, MVG, RVB, Fallon, Keith Deller, John Lowe, Jockey Wilson, and Bobby George.
Okay, decisive, no messing
Re-
about.
I'm really similar to Mace. I've got exactly the same top 6. Eric, Taylor, Littler, MVG, RVB, Fallon. I think we've all got them in the same position. Then my bottom 4, if you like, in the relegation zone, Bobby George, Jockey Wilson, John Lowe, and Keith sneaks in.
Okay, thank you. This has been lively. This has been lively. We could do it again sometime on another topic. Maybe still to do with darts.
Yeah, let us know which topic you want us to discuss.
Yeah, exactly.
As long
Let
as
us
it's
know.
Tour de
darts
France.
related.
Tour de France, guys,
Nothing
how
to do
about
with peddling.
Brilliant. Thank you both. A couple of hours now, and we'll be back on stage.
Talking about darts.
The arena, talking about darts.
Yeah, we love it. We love it.
We do. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.